The budget battle continues, but where is the commander-in-chief? So far, he's been missing in action and has failed to outline a spending cut game plan. Several prominent Democrats, including West Virginia Democratic Senator Joe Manchin, are even calling out the president for being out of pocket during this fiscal fiasco.
Why are we doing all this when the most powerful person in these negotiations, our president, has failed to lead this debate or offer a serious proposal for spending and cuts that he would be willing to fight for?
Wow. Here to discuss with my freedom fighters, Fox Business senior correspondent, my buddy, and the author of Bought and Paid For, Charlie Gasparino, radio host Leslie Marshall, and George Mason University economics professor Don Boudreau. Charlie, to you first. Are you surprised to hear Democrats calling out the president for showing no leadership on budget cutting? Or do you think that this is just a mania, a temporary mania that people in the government have about the need to cut budgets?
It's temporary mania. I think the Republican Party, I think they understand why the voters put him in office. I still think that they spend way too much time talking about cutting. I mean, the Republicans have become the party of green eye shades, and there's no debate about growing the economy. But yes, I think prodded by the sort of activist wing of the Republican Party, there is a real sort of push to cut stuff.
Wouldn't the best way to grow the economy, Don, would be to let people retain more of their own earnings and invest it how they want? It's a truism of Economics 101 that private investment produces wealth, the government consumes wealth.
Absolutely, Judge. I can't say it any better. Just cut back spending, cut back taxes, and you'll get economic growth.
What do you say
Absolutely.
to people in the government, big government types, like your colleague, Ms. Marshall, to whom I'll get in just a moment, that all of this spending actually helps, and that's why the stock market is booming and unemployment's down ever so little?
Well, I mean, the economy, unemployment's down, but it's still 8.9%. It's still too high. There's no evidence, in my view, that all this spending is doing much good. Remember, it was supposed to keep unemployment below 8%. It went up as high as 9.8%, and the economy's still in the doldrums.
Leslie, are you surprised that Democrats like Senator Manchin, now he's up for re-election in just a year and a half, in November of 2012, are taking to the floor of the Senate and naming the president by name and saying, where is your leadership? Would you propose some cuts that we can all agree with?
Well, I didn't understand how he lost his ability and other Democrats pointing their finger at the president to speak or take a pen out and write some cuts and specifics down themselves, Judge. I mean, I'm a Democrat, but I'd like to see some specifics from the Democratic Party. Then again, that being said, when you have all non-defense cutting measures on the right that only cover 12% of the budget, unless Democrats and Republicans start talk about cutting defense and entitlement programs, nobody's going to agree and nothing's going to be accomplished in the long term.
Are the only intellectually honest Republicans in this debate the Ron Pauls and Rand Pauls that want to cut everything? Defense, entitlement, everything. No sacred cows, period.
Yeah, they're intellectually honest, but, listen, I still want to see a program for growth. And I think, for as good as Ron Paul is in terms
which
of...
produces more growth, the government or the private sector?
Think about what those guys actually sit around arguing about. Ending the Fed, Ben Bernanke, this evil guy. I mean, there is a real need to put people back to work. Yes, we need to cut, but the Republican Party is in real danger right now of being the party of green eye shades. By the way, a 180 from the party of Ronald Reagan, and that's a scary thing.
It is a 180 from the party of Ronald Reagan, but the Republicans would be the minority party, Don Boudreau, in the House, would they not? Were it not for the Tea Party folks who said, shrink the government, stop the borrowing, cut the spending.
I agree with Charlie that the Republicans have a problem, but I don't think it's because they're green eye shades. The Republican proposal for budget cuts takes up 1.6% of the total budget. That's nothing. That's like
you're right. It's a small
part,
part, but the message is all about cutting. And I think, my voice rose as I said that, but it is all about cutting. And I don't hear the growth message.
It should be slashed. It should be not just cut. It should be slashed. And tax rates, corporate taxes should be cut. Income taxes should be cut.
Right, but why aren't we debating corporate tax rates being cut right now?
All right, hang on. Leslie, what do the Democrats think? Do they enjoy seeing big government Republicans like the Republican leadership in the House butting heads with Michelle Bachmann and Ron Paul and Connie Mack, the small government Tea Partiers? Do they like when that happens? Do you, as a Democrat, think there's a civil war in the Republican Party over the role of the federal government in people's lives, and we're going to watch that play out during this debate over the budget?
Yes, because who was it that brought up Reagan? And I think one of the reasons the president's going to have an easy bid to re-election in 2012 is because the GOP doesn't have a Ronald Reagan, so to speak, as a candidate. The infighting, Judge, you know, read The Art of War, divide and conquer, and that's what Democrats look at when we see the GOP.
Leslie, the president is going to have to run on raising taxes, which he vows to do. He's going to have to run on his wonderful health care plan. I'm not saying it's going to be a cakewalk for Republicans, and some of this debate is good, but remember, Obamanomics is going to be front and center during that campaign.
Absolutely.
And Obamanomics has been one of the most absurd, economic theories ever conjured up.
He's
By the way,
starting to worry about you. I'm glad to hear you say
I'm waiting for those green jobs to kick in.
All right, hang on about the green jobs. I want to talk about mortgages because the big banks, to my surprise, are barking back at the White House for pressuring them to reduce mortgage loan balances owed on homes that are underwater. Stated differently, the government wants banks simply to forgive a large chunk of certain loans. Bank of America CEO Brian Moynihan, probably one of Gasparino's buddies.
He's one of Obama's buddies.
Telling the Obama administration these write-downs are unfair because it would involve playing favorites and that the government has no right meddling in their mortgage practices.
Listen,
what do you say, Charlie?
Listen, on one hand, these guys are incredible hypocrites. Remember, they all got bailed out.
They're bought and paid for to quote a certain book.
It was my book that I pointed all this out. Brian Moynihan, who's a very good friend of Obama, big supporter, he feasted on these bailouts and everything else. That said, think about the precedent we're setting. You could take out a loan, you can buy a house that's like way out of your means, and guess what? The government's going to forgive your principal.
Don, were you surprised that businesses are pushing back? I mean, when Joe Biden put the arm on BP, give us $20 billion or we'll take it for us,
And
BP basically said, here's your check. Now you have the biggest bank in the United States saying, forget about it. We loan these people money. They have to pay us back.
I was a bit surprised, but I agree with Charlie. I mean, this is a story with no heroes. I mean, these banks are scurrilous. They took too much money. They played the system. But I agree. You don't want to set the precedent of forgiving loans. I mean, look, I like Uncle Sam to forgive me my tax bill. I don't see anyone pressing for that.
The Democratic view, should the president have silently gotten the consent of the banks before he proposed this idea against which they're now pushing?
Well, I have to tell you, Judge, if I buy your butt, I own your butt. And quite frankly, I think when the government owns the bank's hides, they do have the right. I think it's a very good point that you raised. This should have been discussed beforehand because the banks were not solely, but certainly part of a collective group responsible for the fall of the housing market, lending people that couldn't afford these mortgages to have these mortgages. If they're not going to reduce principal, at least modify the payments so that people will not foreclose.
You know what it was, Leslie? It was government and the banks. The government has been bailed out the banks so many times that it created moral hazard, no consequence to your risk-taking.
Right.
And that's what it's doing here. This is a repeat. Listen, I hate the banks. These are bad players. There's 5 of them. There should be more. We should be breaking them up. The free market should be breaking them up by not subsidizing their deposits. That said, I mean, all you have to do is not subsidize their deposits and
Exactly.
And by the way, that said,
you got 30 seconds. What does the president do next? The banks are saying go take a hike. Is he going to try and find language in Frank Dodd that would let him force them to reduce mortgages?
They have.
That would be taking.
I'm going to show you the amount of power they have against the president. Right there. 0.
Nothing they can do.
Nothing they can do.
All right. Leslie Marshall, Don Boudreau, the inimitable Charlie Gasparino. Thanks for joining us. Up next, the play.